She pointed to one of the men saying, "Oh, that's the guy." And the flight attendant turned the photo over and it said, "In Memorial, Flight 401, December 29th, 1972. And the man that she had pointed to was Second Officer Don Repo, who died in the flight. Today I'll be talking about the spooky side of Everglades National Park, but before I do, let's do our question of the day, national park in the news, and friends of the pod shout out. So for our question of the day, Ashley, what's an innocent lie you tell and why?
So sometimes when people offer me something to eat and I know that I'm not gonna like it, or like it just has walnuts or something in it and I don't feel like having that scratchy thing on my tongue like walnuts do to us, I'll tell them, "Oh, my stomach kind of hurts. I don't really want to eat."
Yeah, that's a
That's
good
my
way to
way.
do it too, because then that way you're not like offending them. But mine is I always tell people that I had you when I was 16. I actually had you when I was 17. But the reason why is I was pregnant my entire 16th year and I had you
hmm
right after my 17th birthday. So I guess I want credit for that extra year because I
hmm
basically had you when I was 16, but I like 1 year is a big difference. And so if I
Well,
was
and
like,
I was only born like a month later after
not
your
even. It
birthday.
was like a couple weeks. So I
hmm
consider that 16 still because I was, then my entire
hmm
16th year. So I just want credit for that extra year. Technically, I was 17.
I get it.
Yeah.
I think I tell people 16 also.
Yeah, it's just like, I don't know. That 1 year makes a big difference, I think.
Yeah, and 16 feels right.
Right.
17
It
doesn't.
does. It does. So for our national parks, one of our friends, Chris Claudio, which I know you know much better than I do, he's from CrossFit, sent us a message about this. You know how there's a ton of places in the national parks that are considered paranormal or haunted? Like people
hmm
always like think that. That's literally what my episodes are about. But
Yeah.
the National Park Service displayed on some of the monuments a little plaque that says this monument is not haunted. And they do that because, like, obviously, like we said, because there's all these rumors and myths around certain
hmm
locations. So it's kind of like a joke with them. And they described it as the signs aim to strike a balance between addressing the public curiosity and dispelling exaggerated tales of hauntings or paranormal activity. But, I mean, they might be
How do
haunted
they
also.
validate that? Do they have ghost hunters come out and
I don't
verify that
know.
this place is not haunted?
Yeah, no clue. So I thought that was kind of funny. So thanks, Chris, for sending
Yeah.
us that.
Yeah,
Um,
thanks, Chris. That is really funny.
So for our shout outs, our five shout outs to our friends, first I have Cedar Point Resort, Afterlife All Stars, which is a paranormal team, Tragedy with a View, which is a podcast about crimes. I think I haven't listened to it yet, but I want to. Love to Be Hiking and Scary Scotland podcast. So
Oh,
thanks, guys.
nice. We
Thanks.
have a
Yeah. So thanks, guys. Thanks for the follows.
Yeah, thanks, guys. We have a lot of podcast followers now. That's
Hmm.
good. Yeah,
I
it's
love that.
fun. I also wanted to shout out Lauren Petrowski. I think I'm saying that right. But she's my neighbor who lives down the road and my friend. Um, and yeah, and she's the one who comes to watch the dogs
Yeah, I've
sometimes. So
definitely
we
heard of
like switch
Lauren.
off. Yeah, so we switch off dog sitting. She also says hi to you.
Oh, hi, Lauren.
But she really likes the podcast and she said we sound a lot alike.
Oh,
And yeah, and she thought we were really funny. So
well,
yeah.
thanks, Lauren. I'll
Yeah.
probably meet you one day when I come out to visit
Yeah.
Ash.
Yeah, for sure. So it's crazy. I got a notification on Facebook yesterday, and it was me posting, so excited to, hold on, let me just bring up the picture because now it's just going to sound like I'm making some crap up because I am. Like I forgot what it said. So a year ago, I posted on my story, episode one, Death Valley National Park. And the title was "Is It Really What You Thought It Was?" And then I put first episode is live, listen now with headphones. So
That's
that was really cool to
crazy.
see that. I know, I'm
I
like, it's
can't.
already been a year.
I can't believe it's been a year. I was thinking it was like February.
Well, and I remember like I think in like June, I was like, "Oh, I really want to save Everglades for December. Like we have to save it for that." And like now we're already there, so it's
Yeah, I
crazy.
remember that because I was like, why December?
Hmm.
That's weird because I
I
didn't know
know.
anything about it yet.
Anyway,
Okay,
let's
you want to
jump into
get
the
into
pod.
the, yeah. So first I'm going to start with the hauntings surrounding Eastern Airlines Flight 401 that you talked about in your episode. I am going to recap it, and the whole thing is pretty wild. On the night of December 29th, 1972, Eastern Airlines Flight 401 took off from JFK, which is in New York, and it was bound for Miami. It was flown by Captain Robert Loft and First Officer Don Repo, which were two very experienced pilots. It's important that we know that
Hmm.
because of all the stuff that happened. It seems like it shouldn't have happened. But the events leading up to the crash all started with a faulty indicator light in the landing gear. It was literally just a burnt out light bulb. What seemed like a small malfunction sent the crew into a holding pattern while they tried to fix the light before landing. The plane was meant to be on autopilot while they worked, but with all the chaos of the situation, one of the pilots likely bumped the switch, disengaging the autopilot without realizing it. And then what followed was a slow, silent descent. So the plane began to drop, but so gradually that the flight crew didn't even notice. Eventually, a warning chime triggered, signaling the descent. Basically, there was an alarm going off, but they were all busy
Hmm.
working on the light and not really thinking about it because they're like, oh, it's on autopilot, whatever. The voice recorder captured a conversation between the pilots. So he noticed, like, they were either, I don't remember if he heard the alarm or if he noticed that they had just dropped. So basically, they finally figured out something isn't right. And just seconds after this exchange, the plane crashed into the Florida Everglades, traveling over 200 miles an hour. The communications with the control tower were lost, and no one on the ground knew what was happening until another plane reported seeing what they described as a flash in the distance. The impact was so catastrophic, the aircraft broke apart and the wreckage scattered over 1,600 feet. Despite the violence of this crash, the middle section of the plane was surprisingly intact, so there were survivors. They say that the soft, swampy terrain of the Everglades likely helped cushion the crash, and the muddy waters may have kept some of the more severe injuries from bleeding out. So the mud and stuff like stopped their bleeding. 17 of the survivors basically had such minor injuries that they didn't need to be hospitalized, which is crazy, right?
Hmm.
Like after a crash like that, like 17 people are like could basically just walk away from it. So in the end, 101 people died as a result of the crash. But the crazy part is 62 people still lived. That's like insane to me.
Yeah.
But I guess with the plane like descending so slowly combined with like the middle section being intact and it's just like I guess I don't know, the whole thing's kind of weird.
Hmm.
Basically the tragedy of flight 401 started weeks before the plane crash. One of the flight attendants began experiencing disturbing premonitions in the early days of December.
One sec. Maybe you can't like speak that well because it's Flight 401 telling you not to tell this story.
It seems like it. It seems like it because our last just we've recorded this episode. This is twice now. The first time was messed up, and then
Yeah.
now every time I try to talk, I keep like stumbling. So
Yeah, the first time was messed up and we were just not on it. Like I was kind of grouch and then
hmm
mom, you couldn't talk. I mean, you still can't talk, but it was way
hmm
worse
it
than
was way
this.
worse because we did it at night, and
Um,
I'm a different person at night.
yeah, and you kept saying that like multiple times throughout and I'm like, "God, mom, I get it. Shut up. Like it's
No,
fine."
that's literally like I can't. I'm just like
But
a
then the
zombie at
audio was
night.
off.
Hmm?
And that's the first time but then the audio was off and that's the first time that's ever happened. So
hmm
that's weird. I think it's the ghost of Flight
I
401,
think so
all
too.
of
So
that.
if this one doesn't work out, then we might have to skip this episode or do like a written
Hmm.
transcript or something. I don't think they can jump into that. So back to the flight attendant. Night after night, she dreamt about the plane crashing. She said there were screams echoing through the cabin and just chaos unfolding on the aircraft until it plummeted to the ground. The nightmares felt so real and so vivid that she couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. As the days passed, her visions intensified. In her dreams, she started seeing holiday decor and wrapped presents in the crash. So because of that, she was convinced that it was going to happen on or around the holidays. So word of these haunting visions began to spread among the flight attendants. Several of them who were scheduled to work Flight 401 were so freaked out that they decided to back out, refusing to board the flight. But
Mm-hmm.
despite the warnings and the unsettling dreams, the flight went ahead, and tragically, the worst fears were realized when Flight 401 crashed into the Everglades. So, do you think if you would have heard these stories, you would have boarded the flight?
I don't know. That's so hard because I've had bad feelings about a flight before, but I'm like, it'll be fine because it always is fine. So I feel like I might have. But there was one time I was on a flight and I did think about like saying I don't want to fly this anymore because they came on and the pilot was like, "All right, guys, so we're going to be here for about 30 minutes because we have a mechanical malfunction that we're just fixing up real quick." And I'm like, "Real quick? Just real quick. Like, let's fix this." I was like, I'd rather just like get off. But and then the people next to me were like, "Oh, it's gonna be another 30 minutes." And I'm like, "Well, I'm glad because I don't want to die." Like I literally said that to
That's
them.
Did you?
Yes. Because I was like, this is ridiculous. Like you're gonna be all mad. But I would rather them fix it than die.
Yeah, clearly.
I don't know. I don't know. It would depend on a few circumstances. Like,
I think I still would have got on because flights barely ever crash. And I would have been like, oh, that's ridiculous of me to even be thinking this. Like, she's just
mm,
having dreams. Like, flights don't crash. I feel like I would have still gotten on.
yeah. Yeah, I feel like I would have too. But I think if someone was like really adamant about it, then I would have been like, okay. I don't know. As a flight attendant, maybe not.
Yeah, so the craziest part of this whole story is that after the crash, there were sightings of Captain Loft and first Captain Repo on other Eastern Airline aircrafts. The first reported sighting was from the vice president of Eastern Airlines. He was flying on another Eastern Airlines flight from JFK to Miami, so basically the same route as Flight 401 that crashed. During the flight, the vice president was seated in first class next to a pilot who was staring out the window. The vice president noticed that the pilot was not responding to when he was trying to talk to him. So he's like, okay, that's weird. He realized that the man he was sitting next to looked exactly like Captain Robert Loft, who had died in the crash 401 just months earlier. He said suddenly in front of his eyes, the pilot vanished. He immediately alerted the flight attendant to what happened. So they were like checking the manifest to see if any other employees were on board and like could it have been anyone else? Like,
Could it have been anybody else that just vanished right in front of my face? Like, do you think, do they have
yeah.
a cloak from Harry Potter? Like,
So that was the first reported sighting. And then another flight crew member reported seeing Captain Loft's ghost in the cockpit while flying another Eastern Airlines flight. The pilot was adjusting controls when he suddenly noticed a man standing behind him in the cockpit. The man appeared to be wearing a uniform similar to what like Captain Loft would have wore, and he was staring out the front window of the plane. The pilot attempted to speak to him, but the figure didn't respond. And when the pilot looked away just for a second, he turned around and the ghostly figure had disappeared.
kind of sad because I feel like Captain Loft feels bad, you know? So that's why he's like staying.
I think so too, because it was like such a dumb mistake. Like they've flown so many times and something so dumb, basically a burnt out light bulb that they, and then accidentally kicking off
Yeah.
autopilot.
Well, and I did forget to mention, and I do want to mention this because in my episode, when I was listening to it while I was editing, I forgot to mention that this is the 70s. So they also don't have cell phones that they could just like bring down in the cockpit to like look, like use the flashlight to look at things. So it sounded like in my episode, I was like, oh, well, they were just making a dumb mistake. They saw it was working and then they kind of just like, were messing around. But it wasn't like that. Like they were still trying to figure out if it was working this whole time, but they didn't have a flashlight, so it was hard to see. So I just want to mention that because I don't want it to seem like they were just negligent. Like they did improperly use crew resource management, which is just like the like using your crew to the best of your ability for safety. They did like neglect that fact, but everything else like they were trying to troubleshoot. So I just don't want to make them look bad.
Yeah, agree. And the whole autopilot thing, they thought that they were on autopilot. So they didn't
Yeah,
even know that.
yeah, and I don't know if I said this because I haven't listened to the full episode and I kind of forgot, but they did go to court about it and listen to the black box and everything that went on. And they had some other pilots who fly the same plane testify. And those pilots said that sometimes that plane does kick itself out of autopilot. So it, like,
Oh.
it was like kind of up in the air. Like they didn't say that it was all the pilot's fault.
Hmm.
Like someone definitely should have been there watching, but it could have very well kicked itself out of autopilot too, because that's what has
Well,
happened in the past.
that's
So
dangerous.
I know, but they fixed it. It's the 70s, you know. Yeah. Anyway,
There was another apparition that made an appearance. One woman was traveling on another flight, which they're all Eastern Airlines, so I keep saying Eastern Airlines, so it sounds like I'm saying a lot, but she said she noticed a man sitting next to her. He looked pale, sickly, unwell, and he looked almost like he was gonna like maybe be sick or something.
mm,
So she pressed the call button for the flight attendant, but before anyone could check on him, the man vanished. She told the flight attendant what she saw, and obviously she just like had to, like she was just on the plane. So after they landed, the flight attendant approached her and said, "Would you like to look through some of the old photos to see if maybe you recognize one of the employees that was sitting next to you?" And after scanning a group photo, she pointed to one of the men, saying, "Oh, that's the guy." And the flight attendant turned the photo over and it said, "In Memorial, Flight 401, December 29th, 1972." And the man that she had pointed to was Second Officer Don Repo, who died in the flight.
oh,
I know.
that gave me chills. I have goosebumps.
So they couldn't figure out why all these planes were being haunted of ghosts of the wrecked plane because it's like technically they aren't the same plane. There were
Yeah, I
over
was wondering that too.
Yeah, there were over 20 sightings reported, and it was starting to affect the airline because the crews were canceling flights. They're like, I don't want to fly on that plane because people are seeing like apparitions. And then, so the airline was actually forced to investigate because flights were having to be canceled. Well, they ended up finding out that Eastern Airlines was reusing some of the salvaged parts from the wrecked planes to repair the current planes. So things like like not major things, but things like seats, seat belts, like things like that they were using from the old planes to put on from the wreckage. So every plane that reported like sightings of paranormal activity and like seeing Captain Loft and Repo actually had parts from the crashed plane. So after the airlines looked into this, they removed all the salvage parts and then
Mm,
the sightings on the airlines actually stopped.
that's so crazy. I don't know how I feel about reusing parts. I know you said it wasn't anything major, but to me that just seems like you're asking for a haunting. Because you know how, like, they say that things are attached to entities attach themselves to stuff, like Annabelle. That's a really good example. There's an entity attached to the doll. Or, I don't know if you remember the Dewey house in Indiana. So, that house was supposed to be like super haunted. And basically, like, long story short, this guy had a bad day at work, came home, killed his kids, his wife, stuck their heads on poles, and then hung himself. And they say that if you take something from there, like if you go there and take something, it'll haunt you. And so, like, entities attach themselves to things. So it's just weird to me that they'd be like, let's take this, like, swamp soaked seat and clean it up and put it in a new plane. I
Well, I
don't know.
think a lot of people don't think about the whole like energy being attached to stuff though.
Yeah, I guess. And, like, especially if you don't believe in that. But that's weird.
This is kind of like the Dewey House thing because there is a theory about why this might have happened, and
Mm.
in in this part of the Everglades, as a ritual, the Seminole Indians would throw deceased loved ones' belongings into the water, and these pieces were supposed to hold like the spirit of the loved ones, kind of like what we're talking about, like being attached to an
Hmm.
item. If the pieces are retrieved, the spirits will haunt the living. So whoever retrieves the piece will haunt it. So it sounds exactly
Oh,
like that. So I wonder if it's because it
yeah.
fell into that part of the Everglades that
That was
maybe
already like
that's
blessed or cursed or whatever you
yeah.
want to
So
say.
maybe that's why like maybe it's just like the water is like so that's
Hmm.
why those pieces had the spirits attached to them. So we do have some hauntings in the actual Everglades National Park too. So not just the plains. Next, I'm going to talk about Edgar Bloody Watson. So he's like considered one of the darkest personalities in Everglades history. He was born in 1855. He had a really rough, violent childhood, and his father was like super abusive to the point where his mother left. And when you think about it, back in those days, like people didn't wives didn't never leave their husbands. Like they put up with so much stuff and
Mm-hmm.
they like never ventured out on their own. So you know it must have been like really bad.
I listened to a podcast, and I think it was National Parks After Dark, but they were talking about how it was like this woman would create like poison so that women could go home and poison their husbands because it was so uncommon to get a divorce. Like you could not, as a woman, you could not get a divorce, and you couldn't do like, you just couldn't leave like that. So they would go to this lady and ask for like the tea or, like whatever concoction she called it. And then she would give them like a vial of something like arsenic or something that looked like it would be an accident. And she would tell them how to do it, make it look less obvious. So she'd be like, okay, day 1, give them 1 drop. Day 2, give them 3, and like whatever. Women were actually killing their husbands because they couldn't get away, is the point. So,
So, growing up, Edgar lived in a few different states, but as an adult, he finally settled on a 40-acre plantation in the 10,000 Islands area of the Everglades. For a while, he was a respected farmer, raising hogs and growing sugarcane, but soon he became known to the locals as an outlaw and a suspected serial killer. Watson was infamous for murdering multiple people, though the exact number and identities remain uncertain due to the remote, just like basically the time it was, and it was like such a
mhm.
remote area. It was hard to like track people back then. He was also known for to hire sketchy people to work on his farm, so like outlaws, drifters. So they would work for him for one season and then mysteriously disappear. There were rumors that instead of paying his workers, he was killing them and burying their bodies on his land. That when law enforcement finally investigated Watson's plantation, they unearthed multiple shallow graves containing human remains. The grim discovery provided physical evidence to support the long-standing rumors. While the exact number of bodies is unclear, reports suggest that there were dozens of graves scattered across his property. The whole
That's a
situation
lot.
became too much for the community. And so they were like, all right, we got to do something about this guy. Like, our people are disappearing. So in October 1910, there was a hurricane. Watson had reportedly hired a group of men to assist with clearing the sugarcane from the field before the storm. And then afterwards, some of these workers were found dead. It's like basically solidified their suspicions that Watson was actually killing the guys to avoid
Hmm.
paying them. The discovery of the dead workers that outraged the community. They're like, all right, final straw. Locals, they were already like weary of him, so they armed themselves and confronted him at Smallwood store, which was a trading post at Chokolaski. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but so Watson arrived by boat. He was armed with a shotgun, intending to confront or intimidate the residents. However, the mob outnumbered him and they were fearing for their own safety. They opened fire, so they shot him because they knew like he was up to no good.
Hmm.
Um, so he was shot multiple times and killed instantly. And since his death, people say that Watson's spirit and possibly the spirit of the people he murdered never left the Everglades, especially the area around 10,000 Islands where his plantation was, and also the Smallwood store. The Smallwood store is still there today. So some have claimed to hear phantom gunshots echoing through the swamp, and others say they've seen shadowy figures lurking in the mangroves and vanish the moment you try to get closer for a look. So, for example, a kayaker got lost in the 10,000 area, and he swears he saw a shadowy figure guiding him back to the main waterway. He said the
Oh.
kayaker, he said he couldn't make out the features of it was because it was like a shadowy man, but he said he felt there was like an overwhelming sense of dread the entire time. I find this especially creepy because I mean, you've been out there. I kayaked once by myself, and I remember being out there and I just like can't even imagine because you're kind of trapped on the water. It's not like you can run away. And I can't
Yeah.
imagine like being in a kayak in those like narrow waterways and just like seeing a shadowy figure.
But you didn't like kayak in the Everglades, right?
Right, but I know what it means to be like in the
Okay.
mangroves,
Yeah.
and it's like it's already
Yeah.
a little bit eerie in there. Like I mean it is peaceful, but like I don't know. If I saw like a shadowy figure, I would feel so panicked because I can't swim either. So
Yeah.
I'm already like a
Well,
little bit scared in the water.
I remember when we went kayaking, wherever we did, I forgot, there was like one section where it wasn't like a back way or anything, but it was like less crowded than the rest of the area, and boats had to go super slow if they were passing by. And I remember you could see down below, and it looked pretty deep, but then we passed by like this one section, and it looked like a sunken ship, and like there was like a lawn chair, and like just it looked with like moss on it, and it just looked really creepy, and it gave me that feeling like, ooh, I don't want to be here. Something's gonna grab me and pull me under. Like that's how it felt. So I went away from there real quick.
That is one of the creepiest things to me is when you can see something underwater. Like something that should
Yeah.
be above the
And
water is under the water.
it's mossy and like overgrown with stuff. Yeah.
That is like one of my biggest like icks. Like like you get like the
Hmm.
willies about stuff. That is my one of my biggest ones. And I think part of it is like I don't like anything underwater, even myself. So around 1940, a woman named Maggie Jo Shorter purchased Edgar Watson's plantation. So this was 30 years after he had been shot. She was a member of one of the pioneering families in the area, and she's said to have started experiencing the paranormal activity immediately after she moved into the place. So she said that ghostly figures would be just wandering the property, so they think it might have been like
Oh,
Watson's victims. And
yeah.
there were unexplained noises. So she was whenever she was alone, like trying to sleep, she would hear voices and footsteps moving throughout the house. Yeah,
Mm-mm.
no, no chance. So, as an act to cleanse the land of its violent past, she burned down Watson's house. So, yeah, she was just like, I can't take this. This place has like a horrible past because she knew about it because, she lived in the
Yeah.
area. So, she's like, this place just got to go.
I don't even know why you would move there if you knew about that. There's no way.
Well, it was 40 acres. She probably got it like super cheap. She's probably like, oh, this is, you know.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
mean, I personally wouldn't, but yeah, I can. Some people just like don't believe in the ghost, but she realized like immediately, like, nope, okay, yeah, I get
Mm-hmm.
it. So this land is still part of the Everglades National Park, and you can go on a guided tour. It's called the Edgar Bloody Watson Tour. It starts out at the Smallwood Store, which is the place where Watson was killed. It's a 10-mile boat ride through a scenic waterway to the 10,000 islands, and basically it's navigating the same routes that were traveled by Watson. So it's kind of like you're getting like see the day a day in his life. The tour reaches the remnants of Watson's homestead at Chatham Bend and Chatham River. And here you can observe the ruins of his home and farm, so like what's left. I know everything was burnt down, but there are like a few things like you can see like some of his equipment and tools and things like that.
Yeah.
And then if you want an even more immersed experience, Watson's place is a campsite and it's where his plantation was. So it's like, no, I totally
Mm.
wouldn't.
Yeah, I don't
But
think I'd do that, but I
mm-mm,
would do the tour.
me too. So it's accessible only by boat, and it's a backcountry campground, and it offers remote camping experience surrounding the dense vegetation. And basically, it gives you an idea of what it was like to live there when because it hasn't been built up. So you know what I mean? Like it's almost like
Yeah.
going back in time.
I would definitely not do that then, because if the only way to get to it is by the water,
Yeah,
you're not getting out fast if something happens.
no. And I was trying to find Google reviews to see if anyone like saw any hauntings or anything, and one Google review said, actually, two Google reviews said this, but I'll just read the one. They said for the campsite, make sure you read the history of Edgar Watson. An internet search will get you started, but I strongly suggest you read Shadow Country, which is a trilogy by Peter Matheson. So it's kind of cool. Like you can like
Yeah.
read up on your history a little. So that's all I have for Everglades National Park, and I feel like when you come visit next time, I would love it if we could go on Edgar Watson's tour.
Yeah.
Not stay at the
This sounds like a
campgrounds, but
very, yeah, I wouldn't stay there either, but it sounds like a very haunted area, like all Everglades.
I think so too. I think part of it is maybe it's because of all the water. Like water holds energy.
Yeah,
Maybe
it could
that's part of
be.
it. And then how
Well,
like
and the tribal stuff. I wonder how far. the Edgar Watson and the plane crash were. Because I want to see both of those, like the memorial for the plane crash and then also the Edgar Watson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll have to plan that. I mean, it's not going to be far from me either. I would guess it's probably like
Yeah.
20 minutes from here, and then we could just hit both of them.
Yeah.
That'd be good.
Okay.
Okay, so hopefully this episode works out. Watch, you didn't press record or something.
I had to look. I was like,
I
oh
know.
God.
You did.
No, I think it's good. Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
that was a lot of stuff. I like the very specific examples of things. I think that was really good.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start doing that more because there was a ton
Yeah, me
more
too.
stuff I could have talked about, but I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to like just do 2 things basically.
Leave it for a mini-sode. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So we'll see you guys next week. I think we might do a missing persons episode, but all right. So happy 1-year anniversary, Ash.
Happy 1 year. And thanks for listening, all you listeners who have been there since day 1.
That's true. There are some, and we still talk to them, which is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool.
All right. Thanks, guys. See you next week.
We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.